and welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful Podcast, episode 21. And it's my pleasure to welcome in our guest for this episode, Lance Glinn, national podcast producer for 24/7 Sports, and my old colleague at On the Banks, was our host for that podcast for many years. Lance, great to see you, and thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, Aaron, no, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me on. Happy to hop on the Scarlet Faithful with you.
So here we are, Rutgers 3-0 for a second consecutive year. First time they've done that in 15 years. Going into the season, if where we're at right now, what would you have said in August in terms of where Rutgers is at? And I guess what are you, most optimistic about and most concerned about moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you told me like a week before the Boston College game that Rutgers was going to be 3-0, I would have taken that every day of the week and twice on Sunday. You know, the fact that this team having to go on the road against the Boston College team with at that time obviously two quarterbacks that hadn't really played a lot with obviously Noah Vedrill's injury, and you told me they were going to win by 1 point, regardless of how many points they were going to win by. I was going to take it no matter what. The Wagner game, we all knew what was going to happen there. That was no surprise. The Temple game, sure, maybe a little closer than we would have hoped for, but you know they came out with a win, and it was. I was at the game. It was a good atmosphere at Temple. It was their homecoming. I'm sure they were pretty juiced. I'm sure a lot of Temple players have chips on their shoulders because I'm sure a lot of them think they should be recruited by Rutgers, and I'm sure Rutgers hasn't recruited a lot of them. So there were definitely some factors not going in Rutgers' direction in that game, but they ended up coming out with a victory. So if you told me they were going to be 3-0, I would have taken that, and some. Now, of course, this game on Saturday against Iowa is a real, I think, litmus test for the Scarlet Knights because it's now year 3 of this Schiano 2.0 rebuild. They've shown positives so far through the season. They've shown a lot of negatives so far through the season. And the way Iowa plays, they're two very similar teams in what they like to do offensively and what they like to do defensively and what they like to do special teams wise. So it really will be an interesting matchup. And one I'm excited to be at. I think it's going to be a great atmosphere. And I'm excited to go as a fan, not in any reporting or media capacity. And I'm just excited to cheer on the Scarlet Knights.
And with all that being said, I think the issues that we've seen, we kind of expected, with the offensive line. I think, defensively, they've been about as good as advertised, maybe even a little bit better. But I think, my biggest concern going into this game is penalties, 25 in the first 3 games. How much of that do you think is just working in new personnel? Do you think that it's, are we seeing any positives in terms of that it may turn around, or now that competition gets even harder, do you think that that's still going to be an issue that we have to worry about?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think obviously when you come in with essentially 5 new starting linemen or a starting 5 that obviously has never played together before, that is going to cause a lot of issues. That's going to bring about a lot of communication errors. And I think, especially in that Boston College game where I think they had 10 total penalties, a couple false starts, I think that really played a big role in the fact that they just didn't have experience, next to one another. JD Dorenzo doesn't have experience next to Ireland Brown, doesn't have experience next to Willie Tyler, Holland Pierce doesn't have experience next to Dunlap or Chaffoni. When you bring together a group of guys that are going to play with each other often, but don't have experience playing with each other previously, that's just, things like that are going to happen. You'd obviously hope that those things get cleaned up as the season moves on. I think they will. Obviously, you'd want that to happen this Saturday because in a game that will largely be dictated, I think, by field position, if you continue to get set back 5 yards for a false start, 5 yards for a delay game, X amount of yards for a holding, or on the other hand, if you give Iowa, 5 yards for an offsides, 10 yards for a pass interference, 5 yards for an illegal contact, that could really shift the momentum in one team's favors or the other. So I think the penalties need to get cut down in a pretty significant way heading into this Iowa game Saturday. But I don't think it's necessarily one thing or the other as to why they happen. I think it's kind of a mixture of a whole bunch of different things, all culminating into the fact that Rutgers needs to play a much cleaner game moving forward, and especially this Saturday.
So offensively, obviously, Rutgers has struggled quite a bit, a continuation of last year. The quarterback situation, we know, is pretty much up in the air. Who knows what to read into what Greg Schiano's saying in terms of, Noah Vedrill's been week to week now for a month. Whether Gavin Wimsatt's really a game time decision or not, we'll see. But I guess what is your gut telling you about who we'll see under center on Saturday? And I guess what do you think? What do you think the approach should be from an offensive game plan, and what do you think it actually will be?
So, in regards to a game plan, I think they will be more creative than they have been over these first three games. I think against Boston College, they saw later in the game that they could run the ball at will. They did that. And that's why, especially in that last drive, we only saw one pass play compared to what it was at 10 run plays. And they obviously ended up marching down the field. Against Wagner, obviously, they were going to be very vanilla. No reason to open up the playbook against a team that you're pretty superior to. And I think the same thing with Temple. Now, I think the Temple game kind of caught them off guard. I think they went in with a vanilla game plan and they stuck with that vanilla game plan and didn't adjust and become more creative even as the game was getting closer and it was getting more into crunch time. If they had become more creative against Temple, I think they would have had more opportunities to widen that score. Now, obviously, look, it didn't end up hurting them. They ended up winning the game, whether you win by 2 or by 20. It doesn't really matter. A win is a win. But against a team like Iowa that does have such a stout defense, I think they will be more creative. And I think we've seen that from Sean Gleason in the past, that he has the ability and he has the smarts to kind of go into his bag of tricks and take out a unique play here and there. Now at quarterback, if you want my honest opinion, and this is not coming from any source or anything, like this is just my gut, I don't think Gavin Wimsatt is playing on Saturday. That's just my gut opinion. I don't think he's going to play. I think if he was healthy enough to play on Saturday, he would have played or he would have come back into the game against Temple. I saw on Twitter a picture of him, and you could clearly see, I think it was his left foot was in a boot. Now, that could just be a precautionary boot, or it could be something greater. But if you want my gut feeling, and I could very well be wrong, this is not coming from any source or anything, I don't think Gavin Wimsatt will play. I'm also fairly confident that Noah Vedra won't play. So with that being said, I believe Evan Simon will be the guy throughout. Now, obviously, that makes the Rutgers quarterback room very thin because if something were to happen to him, then obviously you move on to walk-ons. Not ideal, but with the way the quarterback room is kind of shaken out with injuries, it just at this point of the season is what it is. But that's just a gut feeling of mine. I think you'll see Evan Simon be the guy because I don't think you'll see Gavin. And I don't think you'll see Noah. Now, with that said, and this kind of goes against what I just said, you won't see Gavin, in my opinion, but I think you'll see Gavin in a uniform. And now what I mean by that is if hypothetically Simon were to I think Gavin is essentially or will essentially be in uniform as an emergency guy.
Mm-hmm.
If Simon were to get hurt, Simon, I think, is going to be the guy, ideally every play for Rutgers in the game on Saturday. But if he were to get hurt, I think you could have Wimsatt in as an emergency quarterback just so that you don't have to go to the walk-ons. So while we might see Gavin on the field in uniform, warming up and everything, my guess is if he does do that, he would be in as just an emergency kind of guy instead of he's going to, rotate series with Simon like they've been doing. That's just, a gut feeling of mine, no sources or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point about him potentially still suiting up, whether he's actually truly available or not. And I actually said the same thing on when I had the guest on about Iowa this week. I feel like it's going to be Simon as well. I guess I wanted to go back to the Temple game where it's very noticeable that Schiano and offensive coordinator Sean Gleason got into a little bit of an animated discussion. I went back and looked at that drive. That was with about a minute to go in the second half. It actually came, Jude McAtamey missed a 38-yarder, but the two plays before that were pass plays. And, there was a lot of lip reading going on Twitter this week.
I think John Boy Media did something about it, or just a short tweet about it.
Yeah, that was big time. So, I guess my question is my belief, and it's a little bit of speculation, but I think there's some consternation among fans as Rutgers being so conservative. It felt like to me that Schiano wanted more to stick with the run, to be conservative, and I guess while I think that that's going to be a big part of what they do against Iowa, I think we agree that they need to get their playmakers involved, the athletes that they have now, even compared to 2 years ago when they were so much more creative. It's just, I think that, what do you think in terms of the fan frustration? I think that's where it comes from the most for me, is you have these playmakers that, whether you're taking huge throws down the field, big risks, just getting these guys in open space, short pass plays, bubble screens, slants. We're not even really seeing much of that. And is that something that you think we're going to see more of?
I hope so, because I also feel like most fans a little bit frustrated over what we specifically thought. And like I said earlier, I think what happened was Greg Schiano and Sean Gleason, when developing a game plan for Temple, sort of went in with the same approach that they did against Wagner, viewing themselves as the much superior team, wanting to keep it very vanilla, and therefore not kind of exposing even things like short passes or intermediate routes, so that Iowa doesn't get that on film. But at the end of the day, the lack of offense definitely showed. It definitely made everyone uncomfortable watching the game, and it definitely made everyone frustrated watching the game. I hope that they open it up. I think they will. Like I said earlier, I anticipate Sean Gleason being more creative. I certainly hope he's going to be more creative. I mean, this is going to be a great Rutgers crowd, and if we keep seeing 3-and-out after 3-and-out after 3-and-out, which we might see a lot of 3-and-outs in the game. I mean, we might see a lot of 3-and-outs from both teams in the game, because that just might be the way the game goes. But if we just see lack of movement on offense, play after play after play, that what could be a sellout crowd, I don't think it's a sellout yet, but what could be potentially a sellout crowd will not be very happy with the way Sean Gleason and Rutgers offense is going about things. But I do think he'll open it up. I want them to open it up. Obviously, a lot of that depends on the play of the quarterbacks. A lot of that depends, especially against a good Iowa front, the play of the offensive line, and whether they can give whoever is at quarterback, whether it's Simon Wimsatt or Vedral, enough time to drop back and go through their reads. But I'm also a big fan, and I want Sean Gleason to do more of quick 3-step drop, get the ball out of your hands. I think Temple specifically, when you look back at that game, EJ Warner obviously did not have a very strong arm. There were a couple passes, 2 that should have been picks. The first play of the game, Robert Longerbeam should have, taken that to the house. But it's clear he didn't have a very strong arm, and the passes he did throw downfield were pretty much just floating up there, and Rutgers missed a couple opportunities for picks. But what Temple was doing was knowing that Rutgers, if they had EJ Warner drop back and go through his reads, Rutgers would get there with their defensive line. Quick three-step drops, and he would get the ball out. He was at times just dinking and dunking his way down the field. And while that's not the flashy, high-flying offenses we see nowadays, it was working for Temple because they were moving the ball through the air. And I think if Rutgers uses some of that type of offense against Iowa, because Iowa's defensive line is very good. If Rutgers, whether it's Simon, Vedral, Wimsatt, whoever it might be, if they have them go in 3 or even 5-step drops, but it's like 1 or 2 reads at most and just get the ball out of their hands, I think that would go a long way in helping Rutgers maintain time of possession, helping Rutgers maintain their ability to move the ball, get first downs, and get them into range where they could at worst get field goals. Because in a game like we will probably see on Saturday, just getting a field goal or getting a couple of field goals pretty much will go a long way in determining the final outcome.
Completely agree. I think, short passes are certainly better than running over 80% on first down.
And
And
it's
even,
like a run replacement kind of thing, right?
yeah,
Like, obviously a short pass is different than a, sweep on the left side or a, jet on the left side, whatever it might be. But it's still pretty much the same thing. If you have Simon take a 3-step drop and just get it out to even a running back or Victor Konopka or whomever at tight end, or, a short out or a slant to Shameen Jones or Sean Ryan or whoever it might be, pretty much the same thing where you'd come up with a similar result that you would if you were just to run the ball. And it would just create more balance for the Rutgers offense, which obviously we haven't seen yet from them.
totally agree. And I think it does 2 things. I think with Simon, he needs a little bit of unpredictability in the play calling because he is kind of a predictable quarterback, at least so far. We know he actually can run, but they haven't, utilized that. And then 2, I think it gets, I think getting the receivers involved early in the game is really key, especially Saturday, because I think getting them active only helps build momentum throughout the game for them in terms of just, the route running and, execution wise. My question is what you just said. So I think, special teams absolutely could be the ultimate decider in this game. What are your thoughts so far on McAtammy? You know, I've been kind of vocal that I'm pretty confident in him. I know he's not perfect, but what are your thoughts? You seem to be.
I look, he has a leg. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. He can, if Rutgers goes out on Saturday and attempts a 50-yard field goal, he can make it. Like he has the leg to probably go 50 plus, because the ones where he's hit 49 or 47 or whatever they might have been, 48, I don't remember the exact distance. He's had plenty on it. So I'm not worried about him from a distance standpoint. The inconsistencies are just tough to watch sometimes. I mean, he's missed a kick in every single game this season. Obviously, an extra point that could have loomed large against Boston College. Ultimately, it didn't end up hurting them because the BC kicker, I think, ended up missing a field goal later in that game. So they kind of balanced themselves out. But he missed the kick against Wagner. Again, didn't hurt them. He missed a kick against Temple, which could have hurt them because it was a 16-14 game where they ended up winning 16-14. Had he made that field goal earlier, it would have been 19-14. Let's say Temple's last possession, they drive down the field, kick a field goal, they take the lead. Had he made that field goal, it would have been a touchdown game instead of a 2-point game, or would have been a greater than a field goal game instead of the 2-point game. Obviously not a touchdown game yet, but I just, the inconsistencies bother me, and they're so weird, right? Because he'll go out, and I think against Temple, he hit a 47-yarder or whatever it was. Against Wagner, he hit a 49-yarder or whatever it was. But then he would miss a 31-yarder. He'd miss a 33-yarder. So it's like, I appreciate the fact that he has a leg, that if Rutgers just gets it to the 30, let's say, he can go out there and kick a field goal, maybe even the 35. I mean, I think his longest so far has been 49, but my guess is if Rutgers got to the 35, they'd send him out there to try to kick a 52-yard field goal. Mm-hmm. But the inconsistencies, you can't miss those short ones. The 33-yarders, the 31-yarders, the 35-yarders, you cannot miss those, especially in a game against Iowa, right? If Rutgers leaves points on the field against Iowa on Saturday, that's a big problem because points are going to be hard to come by in this game for both teams. And especially for Rutgers offensively, we've seen the struggles already. If they leave points on the field, they might not have that opportunity to score once again. Like points are going to be at a big premium on Saturday. So if Rutgers gets down to the 30 or the 25 or the 20 and they send out McAtammy and he misses a field goal, who knows the next time Rutgers is going to be able to get to the 20 or the 25 and have that chance to kick a field goal again. So I appreciate again that he has the leg. I feel confident in him going out there and at least being able to get the distance on a 50+ yard field goal. It's just the inconsistencies up short. I'm worried that one game it's going to, come down to it. It's going to be a close one. He'll go out for a 33, a 32-yard field goal, and he's going to miss it, and it's going to end up costing Rutgers in the long run. So that's just my big worry regarding him and the inconsistency. But I guess those are college kickers, right? Like I'm complaining, but like how often have we seen, college kickers go out and miss cheap shots and then go out and hit 50-yarders, right? Like college kicker, there's nothing more frustrating in my mind than a college kicker. It seems like every single game, special teams play such a role, not just for Rutgers, but throughout college football. And college kickers so often play such a vital role and also so often don't come through in the clutch. So that's just my biggest worry when it comes to McAtammy.
Yeah, I hear you. I looked at it the opposite of that. He made 3 of 4. If they didn't make 3 of 4, they wouldn't have won. But
That's true. That's true.
I hear your point.
I think it was the one he missed that bothered me. That's where I'm coming from. It's like that one was one he should have made.
Right.
And the 47-yarder, I would have been fine. If he goes out and misses a 47-yarder, okay, again, college kicker, like it happens. But the fact that he made the 47-yarder and missed whatever it was, 33, 34-yarder, it's like, come on. Come on, the consistency of it.
I get it. It also makes me excited, though, because he has the potential. He has the potential to be a true weapon. I think in this game in particular, like you said, points are going to be hard to come by. The momentum in special teams, especially with field goal kickers, is even more. Obviously, momentum is always huge, but even more so in this game, I think, like you said, if you miss opportunities to get 3 points on a 35-yarder and you don't take advantage of it,
can't leave points on the field. Yep.
And I think the other thing to watch for him too is, part of why I think maybe I'm grading him on a curve a little bit is his story and his transition and, not even being in college football until last year, playing in a, small D2 school in North Carolina. This will be the most intense environment he'll ever kick in on Saturday. So that's something to keep in mind too.
And one thing that I'm specifically looking at or not worried about, but could play a big role in the game is kickoffs. I mean, not just kickoff returns, but if whether it's Iowa's kicker or McAtamey or whomever is kicking off for either team, a kickoff out of bounds could go a long way, because this is going to be a game of field position. And there's a big difference, or there will be a big difference in the game between starting at the 25 and starting at the 40.
Mm-hmm.
So if a kick goes out of bounds and you set up Iowa, or Iowa sets up Rutgers with great field position just to start their drive, where they only have to go, let's say, 30 yards or 40 yards to get into field goal range, that could be pretty big in the grand scheme of things. So kickoffs, I think, are also something you need to watch. Kickoff coverage as well.
Mm-hmm.
If ideally Iowa's kicking to Cruikshank or even Youngblood. Youngblood has shown in the return game this season too an extra burst. But whomever it is, Youngblood or Cruikshank, if one of them could take a kickoff or could consistently get the ball on the kickoff and bring it to the 35, bring it to the 30, that would go a long way, because even then, if Rutgers gets a 3-and-out, let's say they only get 5-6 yards on the next drive and have to punt, there's a big difference between punting from the 35 compared to punting from the 20 or punting from the 15. So again, in a game of field position, I think the kickoff and who is more successful in kickoff returns and kickoff coverage could go a very long way.
Totally agree. It's a great point. And I thought it was interesting strategically because in the Wagner game, McAtamey was going for touchbacks, and he kicked 10 out of 11 kickoffs, 10 were touchbacks. In the Boston College and the Temple game, he was definitely trying to pin them, get the kick inside the 5, have them return it, which is typical Schiano.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, if that's going to be the game plan against Iowa, or are they going to, depending on, who knows? I mean, depending on where the game is at, maybe they do just go with the touchbacks just to, I think also too, just, the benefit of keeping guys fresh in that game, guys on special teams, that are going to have to make tackles on defense. It'll be interesting to see, but I agree. I think it's I think every aspect of special teams is going to be a major factor. And of course, if Rutgers can, block a kick like they're known for.
And Iowa, I think, has blocked 2 punts this year. I think they both came in that first game against South Dakota State. But I mean, Iowa has shown this year that they can go out and block a punt. And it wouldn't surprise me, with obviously 2 of arguably the top 3 punters in college football punting in today's game. Not today's game, excuse me, in Saturday's game. I don't know why I said today. It's only Thursday when we're recording, but with 2 of the best punters in college football punting in Saturday's game, you wonder if whether it's Kirk Ferentz or Greg Schiano try to make either one of them a little uneasy and bring pressure on most punts, especially a guy like Corsack, who likes to either run out to more often than not likes to run out to his right and kind of get a little momentum going before he punts it. It'll be interesting to see that kind of chess game of who brings pressure on the punt, who doesn't, when they do, when they don't. It'll be really interesting, kind of the moves that both these 2 coaches make on special teams.
I agree with you, because I think, you're not really going to return it anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you never really do against either punter. Taylor's been amazing, and even penned opponents even like consistently deeper than Corsack has this year. So I think you bring the house, and it's going to be interesting. I think, and I think being at night, this game has a lot of Michigan 2014 vibes for me, where a lot of weird stuff happened. Obviously the game was won with Kimoko Touré's block field goal at the end. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see when a screwball thing happens, probably on special teams, maybe defensive pick, that, great field position, how do both coaches react? And how do they maybe deviate from their game plan in those moments? I think that coaching wise, for me, that's going to be a huge key.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could come down to who just plays a cleaner game, right? Someone muffs a punt, that could go a long way in ultimately determining the outcome, especially if, the game progresses and field position is such a battle and teams are punting from their own 30 or 35 time after time after time. If someone muffs a punt, the other team recovers, they start on, the opponent's 20-yard line, that changes the game completely. So I think the team that best avoid those mistakes, that best avoid those kind of fluky things, will definitely have an upper hand, because all it will take is 1 or 2 of those things to happen in one or the other team's favor, and that could completely shift momentum. It could take a crowd out of it, or it could completely bring a crowd back in it. And I think that could ultimately be what determines the outcome when all is said and done and we look back at this game on Saturday.
And that point exactly is why I think we're going to get 2 big bowls of vanilla ice cream from both sides. Not even vanilla bean, vanilla.
At least to start. I think at least to start.
Yeah.
At least to start.
Well, hopefully, if that's what I think we have to hope for, is if there is a change of momentum like that, that's when you take your shot, and that's when you have to take advantage of it.
Well,
And
it's all about coaches preach the sudden change, right?
Mhm.
When you can get a sudden change, whether that's on an interception, whether that's on a fumble recovery, whether that's on a miscue from the other team on special teams, you get a sudden change. That first play, you have the other team on the ropes. So it's
Mhm.
like, can you take advantage when the other team is on the ropes and cash in for six, or
Yep.
get down to first and goal? That is, I think, going to play a big role. And like you said, those mistakes are could be crucial, and we'll probably see vanilla early on. But it's when those first mistakes happen, what the coaches end up doing with them, I think, will be really interesting to follow and really interesting to see.
So a couple more for you. I wanted to ask, we've already talked about this offline. There's been some chatter online about, the significance of this game and how, a potential win would be a program changing victory for Rutgers. I know I have my opinion, but you're the guest. I'll let you go first in terms of, what this win could mean both for this season and for the program long term.
Look, it'll be a big win if they go out on Saturday and win, regardless of what the score is, whether it's 3-2, 6-3, 7-3, 10-3, 10-7, whoever the score, whatever the score is, 13-7, 13-10, 2-0, who knows, whatever it could be, 3-0. Whatever the score is, if they go out and win the game, you can't understate how big of a win it would be. I do think for the program. Now, would I go as far as saying it's a program changing win? I would not. I mean, I know there are going to be a lot of recruits there. It's going to be a tough atmosphere for Iowa. It's going to be an amped atmosphere. I know Rutgers fans have been looking forward to it ever since that game was announced at 7 p.m. To be at 7 p.m. on Saturday night. I think the path to 6 wins, especially after these 3 games, largely depends on this game against Iowa. I think when fans view the path to a bowl game, especially after starting 3-0 this season, they viewed this Iowa game, they viewed the Nebraska game coming up in a couple weeks, and they viewed the Indiana game as the 3 most likely games to win. Now, look, if they go 2-1, or let's say hypothetically 1-2 in those 3 games, sure, I guess a path is still there, right? Like, obviously, you still have to play the games, and Rutgers can upset a team, and maybe they go out and play really well at Maryland or play really well at Michigan State or whomever it may be. But the most realistic path to a bowl game includes beating Iowa on Saturday night. So I think in that regard, it's a really big game. Program changing win, I would definitely not go as far as saying that. But what it would do is, I think, show that the rebuild is continuing at a steady pace, at the pace that the coaching staff wants it to. This would be for sure the biggest win of the Schiano 2.0 era, I think, without a doubt. Bigger than the Michigan State win a couple of years ago, because ultimately, like, look what that Michigan State team was in 2020. Plus, you had obviously all the quirky things with the COVID year and no fans and everything like that. So it definitely, I think, would be the biggest win in the Schiano era. I think it would also end. I don't remember how many games it was or how many games it is, but it will also end that home Big
19.
Ten, home Big Ten losing streak, which needs to end soon, ideally this season. So that would go a long way in doing so. But again, is it program changing? No, but for this season, and for the near future of the program, especially with all the recruits that will be in attendance, it will definitely leave a good taste in their mouth about Rutgers moving forward. And I think would leave a very good taste in fans' mouth about where the program is heading moving forward.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with 99.9%. Well, I agree with everything you said. Just to add to it quickly is just, yes, it would be a signature win. Rutgers really hasn't had a signature win in, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue go back to Michigan in 2014, a true signature win. I think you could argue maybe Schiano's win over Michigan State when he came back, even though that wasn't a very good Michigan State team, that was, obviously significant. But you get the signature win. I think you're in the national buzz next week. You probably
Absolutely.
get a lot. You get votes. I don't think you're ranked or anything, but you get votes. You get some buzz. Obviously positive perception certainly helps recruiting wise. But yeah, there's a lot more work that still needs to be done for this program to turn a corner per se. And I totally agree with you with the path to 6 wins. You need Iowa. You would check a box for beating a brand name in the Big Ten. And I actually said going into the year, I was asked this, who I thought they had the best chance to do that against. And I think it was always Iowa, simply because their offense is not going to blow you off. I mean, when you lose to a good Iowa team, 14-7 with Chris Ash as your coach, there's always hope, right?
That was unfortunately to say. the end of, because he got hurt obviously in the game, the
Yeah,
end of Janarian Grant's electricity at Rutgers. Let's say,
yeah,
let's put it that way. I mean
agreed.
that game, because he got hurt. I don't remember if he was out the rest of the year. I think he
No,
came
he came
back,
back, but he was
but he
definitely
was never the same player. Obviously, he came back the following year. Was once again not the same player as he was. Um, yeah, that game, and I remember because they lost 14-7, and on that drive that Grant got hurt on, remember it was like an 80-yard run or something like that he got hurt. He got
yeah,
chased down from behind, got hurt on the 80-yard run. It was like first and goal at like the 5 or something like that. And they
yeah.
didn't end up scoring. They didn't
No,
end up scoring a touchdown. They didn't, because they went for on fourth down. They didn't end up scoring. And that ultimately was the difference, right? Because it was a 14-7 game. They score at worst, it's 14-14. Um, yeah, that was a tough one to bring. I think it was my sophomore year or something like that. I think freshman or sophomore year. I think sophomore. No, because it was Ash's first year, right? So it was my junior
it
year.
was 16,
It was
2016.
my junior. It wasn't my freshman or sophomore. It was my junior year because Ash came in my junior year. Yeah, that was, I think, the game that pretty much ended Janarian Grant's electricity, I would say, at Rutgers, unfortunately.
Yeah, both matchups with Iowa have not gone well, but this is the first of 6 in a row now, 6 years in a row that they're scheduled. Well, we'll see if divisions change,
Yeah.
but the way the crossover works here, signed one team for 6 years. Rutgers had Illinois, and now they're on to Iowa,
Can't
which
give us Northwestern, huh? Can't give us
no,
Northwestern.
did not.
No
But
offense to Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern, but man, I love Northwestern.
so, last question for you, just in terms of we've talked about some keys, but ultimately, you can give me a score prediction if you want, but how do you see this game playing out on Saturday night?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth of who I think is going to win. I think the Rutgers crowd is going to be great. I think anytime you've had a big game at Rutgers, going back to before I was a student, obviously, going back to when I was a student, and unfortunately, there obviously haven't been many big nighttime primetime games since I left. There were only a couple, and those were mostly my freshman year when they played Michigan and Penn State, and ended up beating Michigan on the Kamogo Ture field goal. But since then, obviously, not many primetime national TV games for Rutgers. But anytime they have a big game, the crowd has really been there and has really been fired up and has been into it. I mean, those Michigan and Penn State crowds my freshman year were great. Obviously, the Louisville 2012, Louisville 2006 games were great. I think the crowd on Saturday is going to be fantastic. I don't know if it's a sellout yet. Would it shock me if Rutgers football Twitter puts out a tweet saying that it ultimately is a sellout, sometime before the game? That wouldn't shock me either. Now, how they get to that sellout, we'll see. But it wouldn't shock me if they do put out that it is a sellout. But I think the crowd's going to be amped. I think the crowd's going to be into it. I think the first score, and I feel like we say this all the time, like obviously you want to be the team that scores first, but I think in a game that might be devoid of a lot of points, the first score is going to be huge. And whether that's a field goal or a touchdown, I don't think it matters. I think if Rutgers can go out there and get a field goal and go up 3-0, again, in a game where points will be at a premium, I think will go a long way in keeping the crowd involved. I think what you worry about if you're Rutgers is if, let's say, they go down 7-3 or 14-3 or 10-0 at one point,
Yeah.
going into halftime. You worry that fans start to check out of it, and especially if they come out in the third quarter and continue to have trouble moving the ball, continue to have trouble doing anything offensively. You worry about fans ultimately checking out because they kind of realize that it's just not Rutgers Day. So I think getting points on the board early will be a big factor. I guess the Rutgers fan in me has to go with the Scarlet Knights. I obviously want them to win. I'll be there as a fan with my parents and brother, and no wife. She's not into it at all. I took her to one game last year, and she wasn't having it too much. But whatever. Nonetheless, a nice day for me to get out to the stadium.
No one's perfect.
No, but yeah, I think I'm gonna say they win. I'm gonna say they win 13-10, and I think I'm gonna go on a limb. I think they win 13-10. For as much as I was ripping him earlier on a Jude McAtamey, I'm not sure it's going to be a walk-off field goal, but it'll be like a end of the game, maybe giving Iowa one more possession with like a minute or so left type of field goal.
Very specific. I like the prediction. I'm on the fence as well. And yeah, I think it's such a momentum is obviously huge in every game, but in a game like this, it's a chess match with the margin for error for both sides is going to be so slim. So really excited about this game. Lance, thanks so much for your time and your great insight. Always great to talk to you about Rutgers football. And, anything you want to plug in terms of 24/7 or your Twitter?
No, I mean, look, you follow me on Twitter, Lance Glinn 247. Check out the College Football Daily podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The Football Recruiting podcast every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I try my best to bring in as much Rutgers coverage to the national podcast as I can. Even as the producer, I gotta have big markets in mind, obviously. But I try to bring Rutgers in as much as I can. I try to make sure the Scarlet Knight fans get their worth for the various podcasts that I produce. But yeah, give us a listen, give us a review, and obviously appreciate all the support.
Well, a win over Iowa and a 4-0 Rutgers
A
team.
win over Iowa, I think you'll hear an episode of the College Football Daily, or maybe it's not one of our typical episodes, but maybe a bonus episode about Rutgers. I will make sure that Rutgers gets mentioned on one of, if not both of the podcasts next week if Rutgers ends up beating Iowa. I will tell you that much. That's a guarantee.
All right. Well, we're holding you to it. And thanks so much for your time. And thanks to everybody for listening and watching once again here on the Scarlet Faithful podcast.